I can't believe I'm saying this. Has Bill Maher finally seen the light? It's almost like he's forcefully ripping off the blinders that the Democrats have put on after the election, and that's exactly what he did on air to this political pundit from MSNBC, but that's just the start, because I think this conversation reveals a new fault line developing among the Democrats after this election loss that's created a rift between the new and old guard of the party. Watch what he said, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
What I hear from the usual suspects, I'll call them on the left in the media, is just, again, not looking in the mirror. It did
no, they
not.
think
It
they
did
didn't
not
call him Hitler loudly enough.
Or that just a lot of people texted me things like, well, you can't fix stupid. Sorry, that doesn't work with me. Yeah, you're stupid because you're not thinking about the bigger picture. You're not thinking about maybe we did something wrong. Maybe we're not perfect. It's like a relationship. You got dumped. America dumped you, and they're all like, you don't know what you had.
No,
yes, they do. They know what they had, and what they're saying is, we know what we had, and you're a mess.
Now, while I don't blame someone for seeing Bill as a bit of a flip-flopper on Donald Trump, there is no one's criticism that hurts the mainstream media's credibility more than Bill Maher. And that's because he comes from within leftist media establishment and used to be one of them. Here's what he said just a couple months ago, and I'm sure he regrets it now.
No, I'm not even worried about it.
You're not even worried about it?
No, not at all.
Really?
Yeah, no. He's definitely going to lose. You can just feel it. You can just feel it.
I hope you're right.
No, I said it weeks ago. And now the polls are even, but the polls will be even on election day. I promise you. Don't worry about it. Don't think about it. I don't think about it.
But this isn't about Bill Maher. If you've looked at the dismal response from the Democrats as they try to rationalize the electoral defeat, all you see is either gaslighting their own voter base or scaremongering a Trump administration that no one's buying. And at least for that, Bill is one of the few people who's best positioned to take them on to task. And if you need a picture of how massive and conclusive the red wave was, take a look at this map that shows nearly 2,400 counties in the US turning right in this election with a considerable margin towards Trump. Remember, there is just above 3,000 county divisions in the entire country, so that gives you a scale of just how little choice it leaves the Democrats to do anything other than reflect. And by the way, subscribe and hit the notification bell because we'll be holding the mirror up to them, especially when they say stuff as ridiculous as what MSNBC pundit John Hillman says right here, pretending that a lack of why America could get to know Kamala Harris even though she's been vice president for nearly 4 years.
If you're the sitting vice president for a president who has, throughout his entire term in office, been sitting at about somewhere between a 35 and 40% approval rating. People view the Biden administration as a failure. We can have a long discussion about whether they are right about that, about the economy, but the perceptions of the economy were that people thought inflation was too high, people thought we were on the wrong track, 75% wrong track numbers, and this huge inflation overhang. You're the sitting vice president, and you get put on elevated to the top of the ticket 107 days ahead of the election. I think that is a very high degree of difficulty put on anybody, and I do not think she is the perfect candidate. I tend to agree with Sarah that probably in a fully litigated primary, she probably would not have been the Democratic nominee, but we'll never know that. But I will tell you that, there's never been anybody who's had the difficulty of that situation, elevated that late in the campaign. Why?
A Democrat would have needed to run away from
Bill,
the
I don't know
Biden
if you know this, but the vice president of the United States is basically shoved in a broom closet for 3.5 years.
I know.
You couldn't.
She was more popular in there.
Yes, well.
I mean, this idea that the idea in a mass media age that 107 days is not long enough to know somebody?
Could we stop pretending that Kamala Harris hasn't already tried running for the top job in the country? I mean, after all, she tried to get America to know her better all the way back in 2020 when she started her race in the Democratic primary. But then she realized her campaign was an airplane that could never take off, so I don't know why people like John here think Americans have some sort of collective amnesia for not remembering the dud that Kamala's primary run was. Especially when we've seen her fail and falter in those primaries against Tulsi Gabbard, and even Joe Biden. What's so hard for the Democratic Party and the media establishment to admit something much simpler, that the candidate they propped up was one of the weakest, most unrelatable, and unexciting people that America remembers in politics in recent times. It would make it a lot easier, certainly, especially if they plan on swimming against the red wave and making any sort of comeback. For one, perhaps the party could start by actually giving their voters the time of day. It's almost like for the last 4 years, the Democrats have at the top been in sore disconnection with the people, first by Joe Biden simply being incapable of long-form genuine conversation because of his ailing mental facilities, and then Kamala Harris simply being unwilling. Pair with this the fact that the Republicans finally had X ground zero to regroup and organize, and you've got a situation where one party started off at a massive disadvantage in the online media space.
All right. Do the Democrats need a social media platform, this is for you, John, of their own to combat the Republican influence on Twitter? Well, I don't know, but Twitter, it's funny. It used to be completely left. Then Elon said, I'm going to take it over, so it's going to be 50-50 right down the middle. He didn't do that. It just switched completely. So I don't know. It's terrible that I think that we have our own media silos. We need places where, like this show, but there's not enough of them, where everybody comes and everybody hears everybody else from all points of view.
I'd like to steal a line from Dave Chappelle, who said at some point how he doesn't know very much about what goes on Twitter because he doesn't go on Twitter because Twitter's not a real place. That's sort of how I feel about Twitter. And Twitter, not only is Twitter not a real place, but it's become a toxic cesspool filled with nothing, not about right, it's not about conservative, it's just filled with misinformation, disinformation, and conspiracy theories. So I would rather not have the left replicate that if that's what's required. I think the deeper question that the question's getting at is that if you look at the data in this election, the amount of reach of all of these alternative, I'm talking about the whole podcast space mostly, but also social media, the interviews that Trump did, not starting with Rogan, but Theo Vaughn and all of these other things he did, incredible reach compared to old mainstream media, right? Where, the number of people that Kamala Harris reached by going and talk to Brett Baer is a tiny fraction of, if you look at the average, not just the number of downloads, but then the social media plays on YouTube and other places that Trump did by hitting all of those mostly bro-friendly, skewing young male podcast platforms.
I think the problem is both John and Bill here are forgetting something important. The left and the Democrats already have the platforms they need, both in online and legacy media, to be able to run the kind of media campaign they needed. It's basically every social media platform that comes from the progressive center in Silicon Valley, so that's just not a good enough excuse for the party. You can literally count all of Kamala Harris's campaign interviews on one hand if you wanted to, and Donald Trump's one podcast with Joe Rogan at 50 million views beats all of them combined. It wasn't a wake-up call to the party establishment or to Kamala Harris. Nothing could have been. So no, they don't need their version of X, and they just need enough intellectual respect for the voter to engage with them, or not feel entitled to their vote when they lose. But if you're a Trump supporter, perhaps you can take solace in the fact that the Democrats don't need to have learned their lesson, and they're setting themselves up for another failure in the midterms and then in 2028. Publications like the Britain's The Guardian even announced that they won't be posting their news feed on X for the platform's far-right conspiracy theories and racism. Also, publications in the US are doing the same thing. In other words, they're repeating the same mistakes and they'll get the same results each time.
You can't scream about democracy and then have a guy run the table like this and not say, well, it's a mandate, right? I saw Kamala was on Saturday Night Live, as the losing candidate often is. It worked so well for Hillary. Let's run that back. And it just made me think, I'm sure every single member of the Saturday Night Live cast was a Harris supporter. But what if one of them wasn't? What if one of those cast members was for Trump? Would they have felt comfortable saying so? I really don't think so. They would have had to keep it to themselves. That's not a good place for us to be. I remember when, and that happens even more on the left. And I remember when Elon Musk hosted, and this is well before he was a Trumper. This is 3 or 4 years. He was just the richest man in the world. And a number of the cast members on Saturday Night Live, they didn't want to deal with him. They didn't exactly boycott, but they made it plain. And I was thinking, really? You have Elon Musk on your show for a week. You could talk to one of the most interesting, brilliant people the world has ever produced, even about this issue that bothers you so much, that he's so rich and lots of people aren't. But no, you don't want to even deal with him. That's what I hate about the left. You're brats. You're brats and you're snobs, and people don't like that.
As much as you may like Bill Maher taking the left-wing media figures to task like this, it would have been better if he had said this before the party actually lost. Right now, much of the Democratic establishment seems to be in a complete meltdown, trying hard to rationalize or excuse a defeat that only deserves a long look in the mirror. But please let me know in the comments if you think the Democrats can turn things around at this point, because they will certainly need a fresh new face in the next 4 years to lead the party.